I was sleeping soundly when the phone rang in my Potomac, Maryland home exactly 30 years ago yesterday morning. I gazed at the clock. It was 1:30 a.m. "John," the familiar voice began, "the search committee voted tonight, and you were elected Temple Israel's next senior rabbi." On the line was Bruce Corwin, the co-chair of the Senior Rabbi Search Committee. It was 10:30 here in Los Angeles, but Bruce couldn't wait until morning to tell me the good news. "Mazel tov," he said. We talked briefly. I woke Barbara, and we buzzed with excitement. We wanted to return to the LA we loved and where our families and many lifelong friends lived. And as frosting on the cake, the Lakers and the Dodgers were both world champions. 1988 was a banner year. I've realized that there are events that occur at critical junctures in the progress of our lives that summon us to fulfill some purpose. My becoming the senior rabbi of this congregation was such an event for me, and it turned out to be a turning point for Temple Israel as well. Coming here began a lifetime of work and fulfillment I couldn't have imagined possible then. This is the last High Holy Day season I'll serve you as senior rabbi, and this sermon and the one that I'll deliver on Kol Nidre are the last best opportunities for me to share what's on my mind, what I love about this congregation, Temple Israel, why I'm a Reformed Jew, and what challenges us in this country and vis-a-vis the state of Israel. The key question that I've asked throughout my professional life is, how ought we to cope as American Jews in this era of American and Jewish history and maintain our liberal Jewish values? I believe that our challenge is twofold: to promote our universal prophetic values and be faithful to the Jewish people. For me to do both means that I've had to adapt and find new ways to be a rabbi than what I expected when I was ordained 40 years ago and began here 30 years ago. As I've done so, I've tried to focus upon what I believe are our core Jewish values and concerns and what's positive in Jewish life and go from there. I want to say first that I'm not worried about Temple Israel as I prepare to step away from my position next June. I believe our leadership and staff, our schools and social justice work, the beauty of our worship as we've experienced this morning, the love and sense of belonging that so many feel here are firm and rooted. Temple Israel is alive and well, and is adaptable and flexible enough to respond to any and every challenge from within and from without. The reasons for this are many. We're far more diverse than we were 30 years ago. Individual spiritual search, which was a strong trend in the closing years among Americans in the last part of the 20th century, has had a positive impact on the character of our communal worship. We have many spiritual seekers here who yearn for an integrated, uplifting, emotional, spiritual, and religious experience in worship and learning. And we've taken these concerns to heart in everything we do. Early childhood and liberal day school education, more creative supplementary education, and teen engagement have prepared a new generation of young people to take on a leadership position in our community. Their parents, too, have been energized and more engaged than parents of children were when I was ordained 40 years ago. And our movement's historic commitment to social justice work as a religious and prophetic imperative has motivated what we do and helped to energize a large number of people in synagogue life. These are some of the positive things in the American Jewish landscape that have enriched us and grown our community at Temple Israel and elsewhere. Nevertheless, we ignore at our peril serious threats of a different kind facing the American Jewish community now and in the years to come. Intermarriage in the liberal, non-Orthodox Jewish community has grown from 17% of all marriages in 1970 to nearly 70% today. And the proportion of the total Jewish population in America is shrinking. Though we've embraced intermarried families here, most intermarried families in this country aren't involved in synagogue life, nor are a large proportion of the non-Orthodox community. In response to these trends of assimilation, drift, and non-engagement with Jewish life, we American liberal Jews need to ask ourselves critically important questions. What are the prospects of the continuity of the Jewish people if the Jewish people aren't committed to our own continuity and don't even agree philosophically that Jewish continuity is a legitimate goal? Is it possible to sustain the Jewish people without being committed to the Jewish people? Can Judaism exist without Jews? I've said this before, most memorably 6 years ago in this sanctuary on Rosh Hashanah morning, when I explained why I decided to change my then decades-long policy of not officiating at intermarriages. I told you then that I had come to believe that a new reality confronts the reform movement that includes a rising rate of intermarriage. That reality required me to adapt. I concluded after years of personal struggle, hearing the conservative voices of tradition and the voices of my rabbinic mentors in my head, that it's now in the Jewish people's best interest for us rabbis to even more fully welcome intermarried families into our community than we'd been doing here at Temple Israel to that point. That's why I decided after 32 years of officiating only at marriages involving two Jews that it was time to change my policy and officiate at intermarriages as long as the couple promised me that they would raise Jewish children. There are other threats as well that we ignore also at our peril. Fully 22% of American Jews define themselves as having no religion, and fewer than 1 in 3 say they belong to a synagogue. There are many reasons for these low percentages. One is the high cost of maintaining membership in synagogue life. Another is that many Jews associate Judaism as a faith tradition only. And since they don't believe in God, they don't feel the relevancy or need of the synagogue in their lives. Many have little Jewish background and knowledge and few Jewish memories, and therefore aren't drawn by need to belong to a synagogue. Many are engaged in other worthy causes, and many are simply exhausted in their lives trying to make ends meet, raising their children and caring for their elderly parents. I do get it. But by absenting themselves from synagogue membership, they are missing out on Judaism itself, its wisdom and ethics, its capacity to strengthen, give clarity of purpose, comfort, hope, and faith in the face of challenges confronting us in this unstable and difficult era of American and Jewish history. I know I'm not alone in this community in expressing my deep worries about current political and policy trends in this country. The list of challenges frays the nerves, is destabilizing and threatening, and is a moral assault on our Jewish values. As a community here, we've organized and are as active as any Reform synagogue in the country. This past year, the Union for Reform Judaism, representing 900 synagogues and 1.5 million Jews, presented us with the Irving Fain Social Justice Award, recognizing our creative and expansive social justice activism as a compelling pillar of engagement in our synagogue community. Many of you have known me for 30 years. You've heard me speak on many occasions. Today, I want to share with you 6 verses from classic Jewish sources that have guided me, inspired me, and filled my heart in everything I've done as a rabbi. I've taught these verses to children and adults and spoken about them many times. They are among the principal Jewish ideals that define me as a Jew and as a rabbi. Throughout my rabbinate here, these values live in everything we do and are as a Temple Israel community. The first verse I learned when I was in my late teens, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Learning Torah is equivalent to all the 613 mitzvot of the Hebrew Bible, because in learning them, the rabbis of the Talmud believed we Jews are more likely to perform them. I grew up in a non-observant home here in Los Angeles. Despite my having positive Jewish leadership role models in my family here and in Israel, I knew little Torah, little Jewish history and thought, and no Hebrew. At 13, I didn't celebrate becoming a bar mitzvah because I had had no formal Jewish education to that point in my life. I entered religious school at Leo Beck Temple in West Los Angeles in the 7th grade in 1962 and was confirmed in the 10th grade. From the 7th to 12th grades, my Jewish education consisted of studying the Hebrew prophets and applying their values to the United Farm Workers Grape Boycott, the Civil Rights Movement, and the Vietnam War. When I was 19 and a sophomore at UC Berkeley, I realized that unless I knew more about what being a Jew meant to me, I couldn't make any major decision about what I wanted to do with my life. So I began learning Torah with an Orthodox Hillel rabbi in Berkeley. I began studying Jewish history, Jewish thought, and Hebrew. One thing led to another. I became an activist in the Soviet Jewry movement. I joined the left-wing Zionist collective in Berkeley. I spent a month at Brandeis Camp Institute for college students in Simi Valley, and I worked summers and winters at Camp Alonim and Camp Swig. It was at Camp Alonim, by the way, that I first met Barbara in 1971. So for those of you who want your children to marry Jews, send them to Jewish camps. I loved Jewish engagement. Judaism spoke to my mind, heart, and soul. The Jewish people became my extended family. I felt rooted, as I'd never experienced before, to something far greater than myself, to ideas as part of an ancient and modern people. I decided then that I would become a rabbi. I haven't stopped learning since. Jewish learning and Israel have been my lifelong passions, grounding me even as I struggle in our sources with what it means to be a Jew, a Zionist, and a moral human being. The second text is in the book of Genesis. B'Tselem Elohim bara oto. In the image of God was the human being created. Now, what does this mean? It means that every human being is imbued with infinite value and infinite worth, that every woman, man, and child is a disclosure of the divine, that no one is better than any other, a teaching that's especially important in this age of hypernationalism. We're subjects, not objects. We're citizens of one world and one humanity. It used to be that everyone was a body and a soul, but now we need passports, or we won't be treated with the dignity and respect we're due. No human being is illegal. This principle most recently led me to be an amici curiae, I think I'm pronouncing it right, signatory in a religious coalition of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim leaders in 4 separate lawsuits filed in federal district courts against Donald Trump on behalf of immigrants from Muslim countries in the Middle East and from Mexico. I've also been an American supporter, Jewish supporter of the 45,000 Eritrean and Sudanese refugees living in Israel who requested but were refused political asylum in the Jewish state. God created us human beings with the capacity for hope and to be awake to the consciousness of the good, the beauty, the tenderness, the passion, the gaiety, the rhythm, the music of life, to be kind and noble, and to be able to choose to be moral. The third text follows from the second. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your fellow as you love yourself. This central principle in Judaism is the central verse in the central chapter in the central book of the 5 books of Moses, and affirms that we are part of one human family, that every human being is responsible for the well-being of every other human being, whoever we are and wherever we live, that we humans have the unique ability to feel and be aware of the interconnectedness between all things, and for us to be instruments of that interconnectedness. Love, as understood in this verse, is different than the love we feel for our families and dearest friends. The love in the Leviticus verse is an attitude of the heart, an openness and awareness of the other, not because we know them necessarily, but because they are like us, created in the divine image. This verse affirms that we all belong to each other. The 4th verse follows from the 3rd. V'ger lo tilchatz, you shall not oppress a stranger, since you yourselves know the heart of the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. We know the experience of exile, of being the despised other, a foreigner, outside the mainstream. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Words of Emma Lazarus, a Zionist poet whose verse graces the Statue of Liberty. What more defines America and Judaism than this? That all immigrants are welcome and are to be threads in the fabric of the United States of America. The 5th verse follows from the 4th. Limdu hetev, dirshu mishpat, ashru hamotz, sheftu yatom, rivu almanah. Learn to do good, seek justice, reprove the ruthless, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. In other words, might doesn't make right. To the contrary, right makes might. Our responsibility is to the vulnerable and the powerless, the displaced and the forsaken, the oppressed and the underdog, the left out and the despised. Jewish imperatives all, prophetic principles touching the Jewish heart, informing the Jewish mind, and elevating the Jewish soul. The 6th verse focuses specifically on our responsibilities to the Jewish people. Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Lazeh. All Israel is responsible for one another. Throughout our 3,600-year history, our sense of peoplehood has kept us together as a family of families, a force for good, a font of creativity and invention, and for the sake of our survival and viability as a people. These six verses, among many others too numerous to mention here, have informed everything I believe and have done as a rabbi. How we treat people, our ethics and morality, our kindness and respect for one another are the values that define us as individual Jews and as a people. All this said, I'd be remiss if I didn't raise with you a challenge that I believe is central to the viability and continuity of the liberal American Jewish community. It appears, according to polls, that we liberal American Jews identify as Jews mostly based on how we regard the rights and well-being of the other, and not on our own rights and well-being as a people. We champion Jewish texts and Jewish history as tools to effect change in our communities, but not as the basis of our identity as a people. Inclusiveness has become a central Jewish value, and the boundaries between Jews and non-Jews have become penetrable at best and irrelevant at worst. But we Jews are more than universal humanitarians. Elie Wiesel once said that claiming universalism as our Jewish preoccupation and religion, instead of addressing universal values through being a part of the Jewish people, is like blowing through the large end of the shofar and expecting to get a sound. He urged that we best impact humanity from within our Jewish family, tribe, religion, nation, and people, and retain our Jewish identity through study of Torah and Jewish observance. The prophets in their day spoke to Jews and generally to the world. They didn't favor universalism over the Jewish people. Their universal humanitarian concerns were rooted in their commitment to and in concern for our people's ethical and moral character. For them, it all starts with us. I love Israel. An understanding of Jewish history and the love of the land that inevitably comes to those who have achieved some intimacy with our heritage. American Jews and Israelis are the same family. We're mishpacha. We share a common history, a common agony and glory, and a common destiny as Jews. Polls reveal, however, that many American Jews are de-emphasizing Jewish peoplehood and distancing themselves from Israel because of what they regard as a violation of their liberal Jewish values, of the lack of a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the expanding settlement enterprise, the immoral occupation of the Palestinians of the West Bank, the death of innocents from military operations against the murderous Hamas in Gaza, right-wing anti-democratic government policies, and the government's capitulation to religious extremists. I understand these trends, and am disturbed by them all. A cautionary reminder, however, comes from Robert Alter, a distinguished professor of Hebrew and comparative literature at UC Berkeley, who once said that morality on the subject of Israel comes cheap to American Jews because we are not directly confronted with the responsibilities of power, the naked needs of survival. I've spent a lot of time in Israel, as have some of you, and without question, despite Israel's imperfections as a nation, the Jewish state has given Jews dominion over ourselves. That's the core idea embedded in the state of Israel. It can embody for us a deeply rooted sense of safety, belonging, self-determination, and home. Israel is the greatest accomplishment of the Jewish people in 2,000 years, a miracle of Jewish history, a little country positioned to protect itself and its borders against classic Jew hatred and be a beacon of righteousness and virtue on the world stage. It isn't a utopia. Its democracy is flawed. It's modern, messy, polarized, and conflicted politically and morally. During the High Holy Days, I try and measure my failures against a higher morality. I also measure our people's failures against American and Israeli aspirations. I love the United States and I love Israel. But love ought not to blind us to their respective imperfections any more than love blinds us to our own imperfections and the flaws of the people closest to us. I don't easily give up on the people I love because they and I are imperfect. And I don't believe we should give up on the state of Israel because of her imperfections either. The distancing of many American Jews from the state of Israel is not only a serious challenge to our people, but constitutes the most serious threat to Reform Judaism in North America. Now that may sound hyperbolic, but I'm convinced that the American Reform movement will cease to be of Jewish historical significance if we're not committed to engagement with the Jewish state. I also believe that our disengagement threatens Jewish continuity and a Jewish future here in America. Universal humanitarianism isn't enough to sustain us. The state of Israel is the trunk of the tree of the Jewish people, and we American Jews are but a branch, the most important branch perhaps, but a branch nevertheless, and we're sustained by the trunk. The good news is that the Union for Reform Judaism, for the first time in its 140 years, is creating, as we gather for these High Holy Days, a major priority devoted to Israel and Reform Zionism. The Association of Reform Zionists of America, whose national board I chair, and the leadership of the Union for Reform Judaism are consolidating all elements of our American Reform relationship with Israel into a new priority so that we as a movement can effectively engage American Reform Jews with the Jewish state, advocate for our liberal American Jewish values vis-a-vis Israel, and support the Israeli Reform movement as it grows and makes an impact on Israeli culture and society. It's important to know that there are hundreds of thousands of Israelis fighting for what we American liberal Jews value most: democracy, human rights, equality, and religious pluralism. Our Reform Movement leaders have told me, our Israeli Reform Movement leaders have told me over and again that they need us, American Reform Jews, as their allies and base of international support. And they need our liberal Jewish values and our religious innovation to help them stimulate their own communities to create a compelling liberal Reform Judaism in Israel to attract more and more secular Israelis. Just as we refuse to allow injustices in this country to fester without expressing our righteous indignation, nor ought we to turn away from the imperfections of the state of Israel without raising our voices out of loving concern for the state's moral, political, and religious health. My childhood rabbi, Leonard Bierman, taught me when I was young that being a Jew carried a special moral and ethical responsibility. Leonard's teachings have guided me always and have impressed themselves in my mind, heart, and soul as a man, a Jew, an American, a Zionist, and a rabbi. He said in a speech in 1966 that to be a Jew is to know the world's slow stain and to know how that stain can touch every human being. To be a Jew is to be the bearer of a great hope, to believe with all your heart and all your soul and all your might that the world has not yet been redeemed, that humankind has not yet fulfilled the divine potential with which God has blessed us. This is what our tradition has always called the messianic expectancy, he said, the vibrant hope that leaves no place for contentment, complacency, for the rapturous acceptance of ourselves or our country or the world as it is. And so I end this sermon by asking, who are we Jews? And why are we here? We're a people and a civilization, a faith and a memory. We occupy a world of thought and of spirit and of action. We're Jews because our tradition demands that we remain intellectually engaged and morally self-critical. We're Jews because Judaism requires the fullness of our hearts. We're Jews because we respond to suffering with compassion. We're Jews because we respond to despair with hope. We're Jews because our tradition is among the oldest and the newest. We're Jews because for the Jewish people, we're constantly recreating ourselves. We're Jews because tradition affirms the unity of humankind above all peoples, tribes, and nations. We're Jews because above humankind is the unity that's divine. That's who we are, and that's why we're here, and that's why I've been here for 30 years. Amen.